Imagine an army numbering 80,000 fierce warriors, the mightiest military force across all of the Americas, clashing with tribes that lacked empires, grand stone cities, or gleaming gold. Against all odds, these seemingly humble fighters without an expansive empire managed to emerge victorious. This is the compelling story of how the largest empire on the continent was brought to a sudden halt by a people that Spanish chroniclers would later describe as the fiercest of all. This narrative revolves around the confrontation between the mighty Inca Empire and the resilient Mapuche people. What you are about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the pre-Columbian conquests, because surprisingly, there is a crucial piece of history that often remains untold in standard lessons. While European nations were embroiled in their feudal divisions, in the heart of South America, there thrived an empire stretching over more than 4,000 kilometers, from the high Andes to the southern forests. This vast empire had subdued dozens of nations, built intricate roads that rivaled the grandeur of Roman roads, and commanded armies of 100,000 soldiers, moving with the synchronized precision of a well-oiled military machine. The Incas appeared unstoppable, an indomitable force that seemed invincible. Yet their expansion was suddenly challenged when they reached the southern territories, specifically in the region of the Mapoche River, where cold waters flow down from the mountains. It was in these unfamiliar lands that they encountered something unlike anything they had faced before, a formidable enemy willing to die rather than surrender. The Mapuche had no emperor, no shining temples of gold, and no stone fortresses. Nonetheless, they possessed a fierce warrior culture that would shake the very foundations of Inca dominance. Their resilience and martial prowess were so formidable that they transformed what could have been a swift conquest into a nightmare that would last for over 3 decades. This hidden chapter of history, this prolonged, unrecorded conflict, is not just a battle. It was a war, a relentless struggle that defied the expectations of imperial invincibility. The story of how a seemingly unremarkable people managed to halt the expansion of one of the greatest empires in the Americas is a testament to the resilience of indigenous cultures and the complex tapestry of pre-Columbian history, often overlooked in mainstream education. A conflict that spanned across generations and ultimately concluded in the most unexpected manner imaginable. To truly comprehend how a people without an official empire managed to halt the advance of the most sophisticated military machinery in the Americas, we must journey back to the very beginning. We need to understand who the Inca were at the moment they arrived in the region of Maule, and more importantly, why the encounter there instilled such terror among them. Let us go back to the year 1460 AD, a pivotal moment in history. It was during this time that the Inca Pachacutic, whose very name translates to the transformer of the earth, had just transformed Cusco from a modest kingdom into the central hub of an expanding empire. Pachacutic's rise was nothing short of extraordinary, and his legacy would be built upon a rapid and relentless campaign of conquest and unification. Within less than 3 decades, Pachacutic had subdued numerous peoples and regions, extending his rule across vast territories. His conquests included formidable groups like the Chancas, the Lupacas, and the Coya, all of whom posed significant resistance. The Inca army under Pachacutic was a highly efficient and relentless force, an almost perfect machine of conquest. Yet it was not merely brute violence that brought these peoples into submission. Pachacutic employed a sophisticated system, a strategic method of expansion that combined diplomacy with military might. Initially, the Incas sent envoys bearing gifts and tokens of friendship, proposing alliances and offering protection. They spoke convincingly of the benefits of joining the Tuawantin-Suyo, the great empire of 4 regions, highlighting the advantages of unity. These negotiations often led local leaders to accept the Incas' terms, allowing their communities to become part of the empire while retaining their local leaders. They paid tribute, but in return gained access to infrastructure, roads, irrigation systems, and other vital facilities that improved their quality of life. This offer of integration was compelling, almost impossible to refuse. However, not all communities accepted these terms willingly. When a region rejected the Incas' overtures or posed a threat, the second phase of their strategy was enacted, an unmistakable demonstration of power. The Inca military was unlike any other force the world had seen. It was meticulously organized into decimal units, smallest of all, groups of 10, then larger units of 100, 1,000, and even 10,000 soldiers. Each of these units had its designated commander, and logistics were managed with unparalleled precision. The Incas established supply depots at strategic points along their extensive roads, ensuring that their armies could sustain themselves during campaigns. Their logistical mastery enabled them to move swiftly and efficiently, dispersing their forces across vast distances and maintaining a formidable presence wherever they went. This combination of diplomatic finesse and military discipline made the Inca Empire a force to be reckoned with, capable of conquering and controlling immense territories without the need for prolonged violence, at least initially. In essence, the Inca approach was a carefully crafted blend of negotiation and strategic force, designed to integrate diverse peoples into their empire, while maintaining control through their highly disciplined and organized military. It was this sophisticated system, built on mutual benefits and overwhelming power, that allowed Pachacutic's empire to expand so rapidly and efficiently, setting the stage for encounters that would test even the most formidable military machinery in the continent's history. The armies of this formidable society possessed the remarkable ability to mobilize vast numbers of soldiers without suffering from the crippling effects of hunger. They employ sophisticated tactics and weaponry, utilizing powerful shockwaves to hurl stones with lethal force, wielding intricately crafted bronze clubs and brandishing spears and axes with deadly precision. Beyond these armaments, they are equipped with additional tools and strategies that enhance their combat effectiveness, making their military campaigns highly formidable. What truly sets them apart, however, is their unwavering discipline. From a young age, children undergo rigorous training to become soldiers, learning to form disciplined ranks, execute complex maneuvers, and coordinate attacks in synchronized waves. This meticulous preparation ensures that their armies operate with efficiency and unity on the battlefield. When their leader, Pachacutec, passes away, command passes seamlessly to his son, Tupac Yupanqui. Under Tupac's leadership, the ambitions of the empire grow even more audacious. He studies the extensive map of the Tehuantine, the empire's vast territory, and recognizes a significant gap in their holdings, an expanse of land to the south that remains unconquered, a vast region waiting to be claimed. Driven by this realization, Tupac Yupanqui orchestrates what would become the largest military campaign the empire has ever undertaken. Gathering an enormous force, more than 40,000 warriors, he sets his sights on conquering all lands until the very edge of the known world, always pushing further southward. The initial conquests are relatively straightforward. The northern tribes, those inhabiting what is now Chile, readily submit or are subdued. Some tribes resist fiercely, but the sheer numerical superiority and organizational prowess of the empire prove overwhelming. The invaders establish strategic outposts, fortresses, and tambos, and expand the network of Inca roads, ensuring swift movement for their armies and supplies. Everything unfolds according to plan. The empire continues to grow, and with each victory, tribute flows steadily into the capital, Cusco, fueling the imperial machine that functions with remarkable efficiency. This expansion persists smoothly until the armies reach the banks of the Maule River. Here, everything changes dramatically. On the opposite bank, observing the approaching Inca army with keen eyes, are the Mapuche people. Unlike many of the tribes and kingdoms previously conquered, the Mapuche do not have a centralized ruler who can be bribed or captured. They lack a singular capital city that can be besieged. Instead, they are organized into decentralized clans, each led by its own chief, its own toki, a traditional leader, and each with a deeply rooted warrior tradition. From a very young age, every Mapuche male is trained to become a soldier, learning to wield a spear and fight fiercely to defend their land. This deeply ingrained martial culture transforms each man into a formidable fighter, making the Mapuche resistance uniquely resilient and difficult to subdue by conventional means. The Incas, as they often did in their expansive conquests, sent emissaries to neighboring peoples, offering them a chance for peaceful integration into their mighty empire. These envoys would speak passionately about the wonders of the Tehuantino, their sophisticated roads, the protective reach of imperial authority, and how life could significantly improve under the rule of the Zapa Inca, the son of the sun himself. They painted a picture of prosperity and order, promising a future where local tribes could benefit from the stability and grandeur of the Inca realm. Yet, amidst the eloquent words and diplomatic gestures, the indigenous peoples listened carefully, often with skepticism or indifference, understanding that such proposals were not always sincere. However, in a remarkable turn that left the Inca envoys utterly stunned, The response from the Mapuche people was something entirely unexpected and profoundly resolute. They outright rejected the Inca offer, and their rejection was not born out of fear or uncertainty, but from a deep-seated sense of independence and pride. Their reply was delivered with unwavering clarity and disdain. They told the Inca representatives to return northward, to leave their lands behind, for these territories did not belong to any emperor or conqueror. The Mapuche made it clear that they were not under any subjugation. There was no emperor to pay tribute to, no submission to be made, and no authority that could claim dominion here. They warned that crossing the Maule River would be to step onto the path of their own destruction. A warning filled with the strength of their conviction and the fierce independence that defined their people. Tupac Yupanqui, the mighty Inca general, found himself utterly unable to comprehend such defiance. No other people had ever spoken to him in this manner, with such frankness and disdain. It was a blow to his pride and a stark reminder of the resilience of these landholders. The envoys, stunned by the outright rejection, returned to their camp with the message, carrying the weight of a challenge that would not be easily ignored. The supreme Inca commander now faced a critical decision. On one hand, he could choose to retreat, acknowledging that the empire's reach had its limits and that some peoples would not be subdued by force alone. On the other hand, he could follow the path he was accustomed to, met with brutal force, crushing resistance through overwhelming military might, as had been the custom in many previous campaigns. The choice was clear, at least to him. The pride of the empire forbade retreat, and weakness was not an option. With determined resolve, Tupac Yupanqui ordered preparations for an assault. But beneath this calculated aggression lay a harsh, unforeseen reality, something the Incas did not yet realize. For weeks, the Mapuche had been observing their enemies closely. They had watched the Incas build their camps, organize their formations, and observe their tactics. They knew how they fought, how they moved, and how they planned their attacks. The Mapuche had been rallying their defenses and calling upon neighboring clans in secret meetings. These clans, once rivals and often at odds with each other, now united under a common banner. When an external threat loomed, their traditional rivalries dissolved. They would come together under the call of a toki, a war drum or signal, forming a united front against the invaders. Their system was rooted in a deep sense of collective resilience. Whenever danger threatened, the clans would put aside their differences, pooling their warriors from across the territory to stand firm against the common enemy. This unity was their greatest strength, and the Incas, unaware of the full extent of their opponent's preparedness, would soon learn that the Mapuche's fierce spirit and strategic unity made them a formidable force, one that would challenge even the most powerful empire's desire for conquest. The chosen strategy to confront the Inca army, whose specific name has been lost to history, yet whose tactics have been etched into the collective memory of the Mapuche people for centuries, was not the result of brute strength or youthful vigor. Instead, it was a testament to cunning and careful planning. The leader behind this plan was the cleverest among them, possessing a vision that would turn the Incas' numerical superiority into a curse rather than an advantage. On the night before the decisive confrontation, the Inca camp lay remarkably still. Confidence radiated from their ranks, for they had faced and defeated larger armies before. They believed that come dawn, they would cross the river, form their disciplined lines, and the Mapuche would scatter, just as countless other peoples had done in the face of the mighty empire. This routine, this pattern of conquest, was well-worn and seemingly invincible. Yet, hidden in the nearby hills, thousands of Mapuche warriors watched the flickering fires of the Inca camp with tense anticipation. As dawn approached, the Inca army began its river crossing at the Maule. The river, at this time of year, was shallow enough for soldiers to wade through in formation. Commanders meticulously organized the lines on the opposite bank, adhering strictly to the protocols of Inca military discipline, order, coherence, and flawless coordination. Everything proceeded as planned. Soldiers moving steadily, formations aligning perfectly, the march unfolding with practiced precision. And then, roughly halfway across, the plan was shattered. From the hills erupted an overwhelming cry, the sound of 20,000 Mapuche warriors unleashing a thunderous war cry that seemed to shake the very earth. Instead of advancing in neat, disciplined rows, they surged forward in chaotic, uncoordinated waves, an unstoppable flood of human fury. The warriors wielded long spears, some topped with stone heads, and bows, all wielded with ferocity. Yet their most formidable weapon was not any physical armament, but the raw, unrestrained rage of fighters unafraid of death. This was a fury that no Inca tactic could predict or withstand. The Incas, caught off guard by this sudden chaos, scrambled to form their traditional defensive lines. Spear carriers at the front, lancers in the second rank, reserves standing ready behind. But the disciplined structure they had relied upon was crumbling in the face of the relentless, frenzied assault. What followed was a brutal and unpredictable clash, a testament to the cunning and fierce spirit of the Mapuche warriors, who transformed what could have been a rout into a fierce, unforgettable battle. However, the Mapuche warriors do not engage in combat as the armies known to the Incas would typically do. Unlike the disciplined, organized formations favored by the Incas, the Mapuche fighters thrive in chaos and unpredictability. They do not seek orderly battles. Instead, they launch themselves into the enemy lines with a ferocity so intense that it shatters the structured formations of their opponents. Once the disciplined lines are broken, the tactical advantage that the Incas usually rely upon quickly vanishes. What ensues is a brutal, close-quarters melee, intensely violent and merciless, where the chaos of the fight becomes the battlefield's defining feature. The weapons wielded by the Mapuche are straightforward yet deadly. Sturdy wooden clubs, known as macanas, capable of crushing skulls, and spears that can pierce through layered cotton armor. Their fighting style is marked by a savage intensity that the Incas, with their well-trained armies, are prepared to confront. Unlike the Incas, who fight under the command of the empire for tribute and following the orders of their Sapa Inca, the Mapuche battle for vastly different reasons. They fight for their land, their freedom, and their inherent right to resist domination, fighting fiercely to avoid submission to anyone. Meanwhile, the situation on the battlefield becomes increasingly dire for the Incas. Half of their army, still in the process of crossing the Mals River, finds itself trapped. They cannot aid their comrades on the other side without risking exposure in the water, making any attempt to assist a perilous gamble. Those who have already crossed are left vulnerable, being subjected to a relentless slaughter. The Inca commanders shout urgent orders, but the chaos renders their commands nearly useless amid the tumult. At this critical moment, the Mapuche war leader, the Toki, executes the second phase of his strategy. A separate band of warriors surges forward to attack the flanks of the still uncrossed Inca forces along the northern bank of the river. This maneuver leaves the Incas divided and vulnerable from two sides simultaneously, rendering their numerical superiority ineffective. The battle devolves into a brutal slaughter, a scene of carnage where bodies pile into the Mals River, which begins to run red with blood. This is no metaphor. It is a stark reality that the chroniclers would later record in vivid detail, describing the water flowing crimson for hours, a grim testament to the ferocity and scale of the violence unleashed during this fierce confrontation. Perched high above the battlefield, Tupac Yupanqui gazed out with a heavy heart, finally realizing, for the first time in his military career, that he was truly losing. It was not merely a minor skirmish slipping away from his grasp. It was an entire campaign unraveling before his eyes. What once seemed an easy conquest was now slipping through his fingers, revealing a formidable and unexpected resistance. His enemies, the resilient Mapuche, had fought fiercely, turning what should have been a swift victory into a devastating defeat. Confronted with a stark choice, Tupac Yupanqui faced a brutal dilemma: either to send reinforcements and risk losing the entire army, or to retreat and preserve what remained of his forces. The decision was harsh, yet clear. He ordered a retreat, knowing that abandoning the battlefield was the only option left to him, however painful it might be. As the Inca remnants hurriedly crossed back over the Maule River, their retreat was marked by chaos and disorder. Soldiers pushed and shoved, desperately trying to escape the relentless pursuit of the Mapuche warriors. Despite their efforts, the indigenous fighters did not venture across the river. They simply watched from the opposite bank, their message unmistakably clear. This boundary marked the end of the Incas' reach. Their empire had been pushed back to its limits. The casualties inflicted upon the Inca army were staggering. Thousands of warriors lay dead, their bodies strewn across the battlefield, while countless others were wounded, their spirits shattered. The morale of the entire force was in ruins, a devastating blow that echoed through the ranks. Following this humiliating defeat, Tupac Yupanqui established a temporary camp to the north of the Maule River. From this strategic position, He dispatched messengers swiftly to the imperial capital of Cusco, urgently requesting reinforcements. He knew he needed time to regroup, to plan, and perhaps most importantly, to comprehend what had gone so horribly wrong. This was a crisis of unprecedented magnitude for the Incas. Despite their vast empire and their formidable armies that had once conquered enormous territories, this defeat was unlike any they had ever experienced. They had subdued the Chinchas, the fierce coastal warriors, with relative ease. They had crushed the Chimu with their impressive adobe fortresses. They had quelled rebellions in the mountain villages, demonstrating their formidable military prowess. Yet, this defeat, this brutal and total halt at the hands of the Mapuche, was unprecedented. Their enemies had fought with a ferocity that seemed to surpass all expectations. And now, as the Mapuche warriors returned to their lands victorious, they celebrated their hard-won triumph. Still, they were cautious, knowing full well that this victory was only temporary. They understood that the Incas, relentless and determined, would regroup and return. The struggle was far from over. An empire does not come to a halt after experiencing a setback. Such mighty entities are endowed with seemingly limitless resources, enabling them to rally their forces anew, to regroup and strategize, and to launch fresh assaults time and again. Recognizing this, the Mapuche people begin their preparations, understanding that the conflict is far from over. They strengthen their defenses, train new warriors, and forge alliances with neighboring clans, knowing well that the war has merely entered a new, more intense phase. Indeed, the Mapuche are justified in their resolve. Tupac Yupanqui is not a man who concedes defeat easily. He is the son of Pachacutec, the Earthshaker, the great transformer of lands. As a formidable commander, he has expanded the empire to borders once thought unreachable. A single defeat at Mal does not mark the end of his campaign. Instead, it is seen as a temporary obstacle, an opportunity to learn and adapt. Like any astute strategist, Tupac Yupanqui carefully examines what went wrong, and then begins to plan a second, more decisive campaign. This time, however, he intends to act differently. He will not underestimate his adversaries again. Months pass as he gathers reinforcements from Cusco, more warriors, additional supplies, and seasoned commanders. He reorganizes his army, instilling new tactics and techniques. He studies the terrain surrounding the Mal River meticulously, sending spies to observe and report on the movements of the Mapuche forces. Tupac Yupanqui understands that to succeed, he must approach this renewed effort with precision and foresight. There will be no surprises this time. The empire aims to crush the resistance through meticulous planning and overwhelming force. The second offensive is launched nearly a year after the initial defeat. The Incas cross the Maule at a different point, where the river is broader, yet less deep, taking advantage of better crossing conditions. This time, they arrive in a disciplined formation, prepared to withstand an attack rather than be caught unawares. They establish a fortified camp on the southern bank of the river, constructing sturdy palisades and digging trenches to bolster their defenses. The Incas understand that victory depends on discipline, preparation, and strategic placement. Their approach is methodical and relentless, aiming to turn the tide of the conflict decisively in their favor, demonstrating the resilience and adaptability of their formidable empire. Tupac Yupanqui was determined not to repeat the same mistake twice. The Mapuche, perched silently on the surrounding hills, observed the scene below with keen eyes. They saw the fortified camp, recognized the renewed discipline of the Inca army, and understood that this time, the situation was fundamentally different. They knew they could not simply charge headlong into the entrenched Incan positions and expect to break through their formidable lines. Such a reckless assault would only lead to further slaughter and failure. Instead, they needed a more cunning and subtle approach. Fortunately for the Mapuche, their leader, Toki, had devised a clever new strategy. Rather than launching direct attacks on the main encampment, they embarked on a calculated campaign of attrition. Night after night, they launched hit-and-run assaults against Incan patrols, striking swiftly and then retreating into the shadows before the enemy could respond. They set up ambushes along supply routes, ambushing small patrols and caravans, disrupting the flow of provisions and reinforcements. Small, swift incursions against isolated groups of warriors who wandered away from the safety of the main camp became a hallmark of their tactics. This land, which the Incas now found themselves in, was entirely foreign to them. The Mapuche knew every inch of this terrain, the shape of each hill, the twists of each valley, the cover offered by every forested patch. This intimate knowledge gave them a deadly advantage. The Incas, unfamiliar with the land, were at a significant disadvantage, and this disparity began to show in the mounting casualties. The losses were not dramatic in a single decisive battle. Instead, they accumulated gradually. 10 men here, 20 there, 50 in a well-executed ambush. Over time, these small losses added up, eroding the strength and morale of the Inca forces. What was even more damaging than the gradual depletion of their numbers was the psychological impact. Fear started to take hold among the Inca warriors. They grew increasingly hesitant to leave the safety of their camp, reluctant to venture into the darkness of night or into the thick forests, knowing that lurking outside were the formidable Mapuche fighters, always waiting in ambush. The fear of the unknown, the unseen enemy, began to gnaw at their confidence. In response, Tupac Yupanqui sought to compel a decisive confrontation. He marched his main force deep into Mapuche territory, intent on forcing the enemy into open battle. His goal was to catch the Mapuche off guard in a large, conclusive engagement that would decisively end the conflict. Yet, the Mapuche refused to grant him that satisfaction. Whenever the Inca army advanced into their land, the Mapuche tacticians ordered their warriors to retreat into the forests and mountains. The guerrillas vanished into the natural cover, avoiding direct confrontation. This strategic retreat allowed them to preserve their strength and prolong the struggle, frustrating Tupac Yupanqui's plans and forcing him to chase shadows through unfamiliar, treacherous terrain. As the Inca's forces retreat, exhausted and frustrated, they do so without having confronted their main adversary directly. In the shadows, the Mapuche warriors emerge once again, launching swift and brutal attacks on the rear guard. They strike with lethal precision, eliminating the stragglers who lag behind, and then dissolve into the wilderness before the Incas can mount a counterattack. This pattern repeats itself, an elusive, relentless guerrilla campaign that is steadily eroding the morale of the Inca army. These seasoned warriors of the Mapuche are masters of guerrilla warfare, a style vastly different from the traditional open field battles that the Incas excelled at. The Incas were trained for large-scale confrontations, sieges, pitched battles where strict discipline, precise coordination, and overwhelming organization often decided the outcome. But this new form of warfare, conducted in the shadows and on unfamiliar terrain, is an entirely different challenge. Their enemies do not engage in direct combat under unfavorable conditions. Instead, they strike swiftly and disappear, refusing to be caught or subdued. The Incas find themselves increasingly ill-equipped to cope with this elusive enemy. Months pass, and the Inca army remains immobilized, stuck in a protracted standstill south of the Maule River. Every attempt to push forward results in severe losses, making any further advance unsustainable. Conversely, retreating would mean accepting a humiliating defeat, an acknowledgement that their campaign has failed. The leader, Tupac Yupanqui, faces a crisis unprecedented in the history of the Inca Empire. The vast empire, which once swiftly subdued nations in mere weeks, now finds itself unable to make even minor territorial gains. Instead, it remains entrenched in a seemingly futile stalemate that threatens the very integrity of their campaign. Meanwhile, troubling news arrives from Cusco. Disturbances in the northern regions of the empire, rebellions are brewing, and various tribes observe the Inca army's stagnation in the south. They begin to think that perhaps, just perhaps, this is the moment to throw off the yoke of Inca domination. The idea of seizing this opportunity to rebel gains traction among those who have long resisted Inca rule. Tupac Yupanqui is faced with a harrowing decision. He can choose to remain obsessively focused on subduing the Mapuche, pushing further south, while the empire's unity and stability erode elsewhere. Alternatively, he might have to confront the uncomfortable truth that the empire's reach has limits, that its expansion is no longer sustainable. This realization is agonizing, a profound challenge to everything he believes in and has fought for. It is a moment of profound dilemma: to continue the relentless pursuit of conquest, risking the disintegration of the empire, or to accept the harsh reality that their empire may have reached its natural boundaries. Such a choice weighs heavily on his conscience, forcing him to confront the true cost of imperial ambition and the fragile nature of conquest itself. You stand against the imperial ideology that claims the Tawaginso is destined to dominate the entire known world. However, this stance also reflects a pragmatic decision rooted in strategic considerations. A great military leader does not only recognize the opportune moment to launch an attack, but also understands when it is wise to withdraw in order to preserve what has already been gained. Such wisdom is exemplified by Tupac Yupanqui, who issues the final retreat. This retreat is not a chaotic flight, as had occurred previously in moments of desperation. Rather, it is a carefully organized, disciplined withdrawal. The Incas army gradually pulls back from the Maule River, establishing fortified positions along the northern bank. The message conveyed by this action is unmistakable. We have reached our limit. This is our southern boundary. We will not cross it again. Simultaneously, they issue a clear warning to their neighbors. Do not attempt to cross into Incas territory from the north. The Mapuche, in turn, accept this unspoken boundary. Their acceptance is not driven by fear of the Incas. Rather, it stems from their own historical stance. They never sought to conquer Incan lands. Their primary aim was simply to defend their own territory, to maintain their independence, and to be left in peace. And, remarkably, they have succeeded. They achieved what no other indigenous people in South America had managed before. They halted the expansion of the most formidable empire the continent had ever known. Yet, the story does not end there. Although Tupac Yupanqui recognizes the territorial limit along the Maule, he does not accept defeat in its entirety. Instead, he conceives a new plan, one that relies on patience and strategic long-term efforts. If he cannot subjugate the Mapuche through force, then he will conquer them through other means, employing a different kind of strategy, one that has historically proven effective for the empire: cultural assimilation. In pursuit of this goal, the Incas begin establishing settlements near the Maule River, aiming to create a foothold in Mapuche territory. They actively invite neighboring communities and clans of the Mapuche to join the empire, offering them incentives such as trade opportunities, protection, and access to advanced agricultural technology. Their strategy is to integrate these groups gradually, transforming allegiance and culture over time, rather than through immediate military conquest. This approach reflects a calculated and patient effort to expand influence, leveraging the power of cultural integration to ensure long-term dominance without the need for continuous military conflict. While some groups have shown a willingness to accept the new realities, though not many, there are still pockets of resistance. These regions, where allegiance remains uncertain, gradually morph into buffer zones, acting as transitional areas between the territories of the Mapuche and the Incas. Over time, this shifting dynamic leads to a stabilization of the border, creating a liminal space that neither fully belongs to one side nor the other, serving as a buffer that helps prevent outright conflict. Tupac Yupanqui, the prominent Inca ruler, eventually makes his way back to Cusco, the heart of the empire. His return marks a decisive turning point, as he swiftly crushes the uprisings that have flared up in the northern territories. With these rebellions quelled, he proceeds to extend the empire's reach in multiple directions. His armies push eastward into the dense Amazonian jungles, while others advance along the Pacific coast, consolidating Inca dominance along the continent's western edge. Meanwhile, the Tawantinsuyo, an expanding confederation of tribes allied with or subordinate to the Incas, continues its growth and consolidation. Yet to the south, the Maule region remains a stark scar on the landscape. This southern boundary, a persistent reminder of the limits of even the mightiest empire, underscores that no matter how vast, all empires have their frontiers and vulnerabilities. The years roll on, and eventually, Tupac Yupanqui passes away. His successor is Huayna Capac, the son who inherits the throne and the empire's vast responsibilities. Huayna Capac is celebrated as the last truly great Inca emperor, the pinnacle of Inca power and territorial expansion. Under his leadership, the empire reaches its greatest extent, encompassing millions of inhabitants and spanning thousands of kilometers of land. An intricate network of roads crisscrosses the empire, facilitating communication, trade, and military movement. Ingenious irrigation systems sustain agriculture, while imposing fortresses and magnificent temples adorn the landscape, reflecting the empire's grandeur and engineering prowess. This era marks the zenith of Inca dominance, a time when the empire's influence is unmatched in the region. Yet, even amidst this prosperity, Huayna Capac's ambitions extend beyond the northern borders. His gaze turns southward, toward the land of the Mapuche peoples. The question lingers in his mind. Will he be the ruler who finally conquers those who have long resisted Inca dominance, just as his father and grandfather before him had attempted? Driven by this desire, he prepares for what will be his most ambitious military campaign yet, a third, colossal effort to subjugate the southern territories. He mobilizes an army numbering over 50,000 warriors, selecting the most capable commanders, equipping his forces with the finest weapons available, and orchestrating logistics with meticulous precision. Confident in the strength of his forces and the might of the Inca military machine, considered the most formidable in all of the Americas, Huayna Capac leads his armies southward. His march is fueled by the assurance of victory, as he believes that this campaign will finally bring the Mapuche lands under Inca control. However, the Inca ruler is also a shrewd strategist. Having studied the campaigns of his father and grandfather, he is well aware of the mistakes made in previous efforts and understands the complexities of conquering the resilient Mapuche peoples. With this knowledge, he plans his campaign carefully, knowing that success depends not only on military strength, but also on strategy, adaptability, and understanding the terrain and the formidable resistance he will face. The Mapuche understood well that conventional tactics would never be enough to defeat their resilient foes. Recognizing the strength of the Inca approach, they devised a new and more sophisticated strategy, one that eschewed direct confrontation in favor of a gradual, persistent effort to control the land. Instead of seeking a decisive, all-out battle, their plan focused on the incremental domination of territory through a carefully coordinated network of fortified outposts. The brilliance of this approach lay in its elegant simplicity. The construction of stone fortresses, pucara, placed at regular intervals across the landscape, each one manned by a dedicated force of warriors committed to defending and asserting their presence. These strongholds would be interconnected via well-maintained pathways, forming a strategic web that would slowly but surely extend the influence of the Mapuche across the region. In addition to these fortifications, the strategy called for the establishment of colonies of Midames, loyal settlers who would be relocated from the heart of the Inca Empire to the newly conquered lands. These colonists would serve as a solid foundation for the ongoing process of colonization, helping to secure the territory and embed Mapuche influence into the fabric of the land. The entire scheme echoed the classic Roman method of frontier fortification, a system developed independently on the other side of the world but remarkably similar in its principles. The idea was to create a series of defensive strongholds that would act as bulwarks against potential invasions or incursions, while gradually expanding the control of the indigenous population. The initial phase of construction saw the first of these fortresses rising, without encountering significant resistance. The Incas, confident in their expanding empire, established strategic positions to the north of the Maule River and began their slow advance southward. As their influence spread, they cultivated the surrounding lands, bringing families to settle in these areas, and built tambos, storage facilities designed to hold provisions and supplies along the way. Each fortress, with its imposing stone walls and strategic location, became a clear statement of permanence. They proclaimed to all, "We are here to stay." Through the very stones meticulously stacked in the characteristic style of Inca architecture, the Mapuche watched these developments with cautious observation and intense debate. Some Toki, leaders and elders, argued that an immediate attack on the nascent fortresses was necessary, believing that striking before they became fully fortified would prevent the Incas from consolidating their hold. Others, however, warned that such a direct assault might play into Inca hands, as attacking fortified positions would turn the battle into a terrain where the empire held a natural advantage. They reasoned that patience and a different tactic might be more effective. In the end, a strategic decision was made to adopt a more subtle approach. Instead of rushing into combat, the Mapuche would allow the Incas to complete their fortresses. Once the structures were fully established, they would isolate each one, cutting off supplies and reinforcements, and gradually weaken the enemy's hold. This method aimed to turn the Incas' own strength, their solidified positions, against them, slowly eroding their influence through containment and attrition rather than direct confrontation. Such a plan required patience, discipline, and a deep understanding of both their own resilience and the weaknesses inherent in the Incas' expansionist ambitions. The Mapuche strategy proves to be devastatingly effective in its precision and ingenuity. Rather than launching direct assaults on the well-fortified strongholds themselves, they focused their attacks on everything else surrounding these formidable bastions. They target the vital arteries, the pathways connecting the fortresses, the supply caravans that sustain them, the cultivated fields that provide food, and the groups of workers and laborers essential for maintenance and support. By doing so, they transform each fortress into an isolated island, cut off from the outside world amidst hostile and indifferent territory. The garrisons stationed within these defenses find themselves trapped, unable to venture out without risking deadly ambushes. Their supply lines become increasingly tenuous, and as the siege drags on, they struggle to receive regular reinforcements or provisions. Slowly but relentlessly, the siege begins to take its toll. Starvation and exhaustion set in, and the once imposing strongholds start to weaken from within. Wapak, the leader of the resistance, dispatches rescue expeditions, columns of warriors brave enough to attempt reaching the besieged fortresses. Some of these rescue parties succeed in breaking through the encirclement, but many are ambushed en route, their efforts thwarted by cunning enemy tactics. Those that do arrive at the fortresses often find a grim scene. More mouths to feed, yet supplies that have grown scarce, and the fortress's defenses stretched to their limits. The situation on the ground becomes increasingly desperate and unsustainable, with each fortress facing the imminent threat of collapse. Some are forced to be evacuated under threat of starvation or attack, while others are abandoned in the face of mounting losses. Worse still, there are instances where garrison soldiers, attempting to retreat, are brutally massacred by their enemies, a tragic and humiliating end to their efforts. This sequence of events marks the second significant defeat for the Incas on Mapuche soil. Unlike the first, which was characterized by a clear, bloody battlefield confrontation, this defeat is quieter, less dramatic in its physical violence, but perhaps even more humiliating. It starkly reveals a harsh truth. Even with meticulous planning, formidable fortifications, and seemingly unlimited resources, the mighty Inca Empire is incapable of maintaining a sustained occupation across the rugged, resilient lands of the Mapuche. In the midst of this bleak scenario, something extraordinary unfolds. Huaynacapac, the Mapuche leader, does something that no Inca emperor would typically do in negotiations. He extends an invitation for dialogue, not as conqueror versus conquered, but as equals. He initiates a process that implicitly acknowledges the obvious, that the resistance and sovereignty of the Mapuche people cannot be subdued by force alone. Instead, he creates a space for conversation, a recognition of mutual respect and the possibility of coexistence, which stands in stark contrast to the usual pattern of conquest and submission. This act of diplomacy marks a turning point, a subtle yet powerful acknowledgement that even in the face of overwhelming military setbacks, the spirit of resistance endures, and dialogue becomes an unexpected path toward potential understanding and peace. The Mapuche people cannot be subdued, no matter what strategies are employed, neither through sheer force, nor through fortifications, nor through any known military tactics. Their resilience and fierce independence have proven to be insurmountable obstacles to conquest. Instead of warfare, negotiations are held in neutral territories, specifically in the region north of the Maule River. These diplomatic meetings are approached with great caution by the Mapuche Toquis, the spiritual and political leaders. Although they harbor a deep mistrust of the Incas, distrust rooted in past betrayals and conflicts, they are also weary from endless warfare that has taken a heavy toll on their communities. Their warriors have fallen in battle, their fields have been ravaged, and the ongoing conflict has exhausted their resources and spirit. The toll of eternal war is felt not only in terms of lives lost, but also through the depletion of their land and crops, leaving them physically and emotionally drained. The agreement that ultimately emerges is nothing short of historic, marking a significant turning point in regional history. It designates the Maule River as the definitive boundary between the two peoples. The Incas, recognizing this demarcation, will not attempt to cross it again, halting their eastward expansion. In return, the Mapuche commit to refraining from attacking territories north of the river, territories controlled by the Incas, thus establishing a de facto border. Trade between the two nations is permitted, but it is limited strictly to the exchange of goods. Cultural interactions, exchanges of ideas, or attempts at assimilation are deliberately avoided, allowing each people to preserve their distinct identities. The Mapuche will retain full independence, maintaining their sovereignty and cultural integrity. Meanwhile, the Incas will uphold their imperial pride by publicly declaring that their decision not to conquer the southern lands was strategic and pragmatic, a recognition that these territories were not worth the effort of conquest. This narrative, although widely accepted, is fundamentally a fabrication, a manufactured story that both sides can claim as a victory. The Incas might boast that they set the boundaries of their empire exactly where they wished, asserting their territorial dominance. Conversely, the Mapuche can celebrate having successfully defended their homeland against the mightiest empire in the Americas. Yet, the underlying truth is far more nuanced and complex than these simplified narratives suggest. In reality, the Incas were halted in their southward expansion. Their military campaigns came to a standstill, and their ambitions to conquer further into the southern lands were effectively thwarted. The Mapuche, on their part, managed to preserve their freedom and independence, resisting imperial domination. The Maule River thus became a symbolic and literal dividing line, where the tide of imperial expansion ultimately came to a halt. Huayna Capac, the prominent Mapuche leader, eventually returns to Cuzco, the heart of the Inca Empire. After this, he will no longer speak of future conquests in the south. Instead, his focus shifts inward, consolidating the empire's existing territories, strengthening governance, and developing Quito as a second northern capital, aiming to stabilize and expand the administrative reach of the Incas in other regions. This turn of events marks a significant pause in the relentless march of empire building, highlighting how resistance and strategic diplomacy can alter the course of history. The topic of the Mapuche has become a taboo within the corridors of imperial authority. In official histories and formal songs, such as those sung by Victoria Inca, the southern regions are scarcely mentioned, their existence glossed over or dismissed. The chroniclers, those official storytellers of empire, speak vaguely of territories that the empire chose not to conquer, citing a lack of interest or strategic importance as reasons for their neglect. Yet within the military barracks, among seasoned warriors and veterans who have fought in countless campaigns, the truth is understood without ambiguity. These hardened men know well that there is a people living south of the Maule River, an indigenous community that has never been subdued, never incorporated into the empire's vast dominion. This community does not belong to an empire in the traditional sense. They are not governed by a centralized authority, nor subjected to imperial rule. Yet what they possess is perhaps more valuable than territorial conquest, an unyielding resolve to remain free, to preserve their independence and way of life against all odds. Their willpower is unbreakable, a silent but powerful defiance that echoes through generations. And here, history takes a surprising turn that no one could have anticipated. While the Inca Empire and the Mapuche establish a tenuous, often tense border, learning to coexist with mutual suspicion and cautious diplomacy, something extraordinary is unfolding on the other side of the world, an event that will, inevitably, alter the course of history. Across the vast Atlantic Ocean, in Europe, a man named Christopher Columbus has just succeeded in convincing the Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, to fund a voyage that many considered impossible. This journey, driven by ambition and curiosity, will have repercussions that no indigenous peoples of the Americas could foresee. It is the year 1632, a time when the echoes of Columbus's initial voyage 40 years earlier still resonate across the continent. Since that fateful arrival in the Caribbean, the Spanish have been deeply engaged in conquest and colonization. They have succeeded in subjugating the islands, dismantling the mighty Aztec Empire under the leadership of Hernán Cortés, and establishing themselves as dominant powers in the New World. Rumors of another vast empire, one rich in gold, precious stones, and other treasures, have begun to circulate among the conquistadors. This empire, they say, lies further south along the western coast of South America, sprawling across the continent with vast wealth and formidable defenses. News of this wealth has sparked the imagination and greed of explorers and soldiers alike. Among them is Francisco Pizarro, who arrives in Peru with a force of fewer than 200 men. Such a force seems almost laughably small, a mere handful compared to the vast territories they seek to conquer. Yet, Pizarro possesses a set of advantages that the indigenous populations have never faced before: horses that thunder across the terrain, firearms that roar with deadly precision, and armor forged from steel that offers protection and intimidation. In this moment of history, the seemingly insignificant force of a handful of men holds the potential to change everything, heralding the beginning of a new era defined by conquest, clash, and the profound transformation of societies on both sides of the ocean. You are equipped with knowledge up to October of the year 2023. And with that in mind, allow me to craft a richly detailed and eloquently rewritten narrative based on your original text. The resulting story will be approximately 25% longer, elaborating on the original ideas through vivid descriptions, nuanced explanations, and seamless transitions, all while preserving the core facts and meaning. Against all odds, he arrives at precisely the most tumultuous moment in the history of the Inca Empire. At that time, the once mighty civilization is torn asunder by a bitter and savage civil war between two brothers vying for control, Huáscar and Atahualpa. This internal conflict is nothing short of brutal, with fierce battles, treacherous betrayals, and widespread devastation ravaging the land. Eventually, Atahualpa emerges victorious, capturing Huáscar and consolidating his power. Yet, despite his triumph, the empire is left weakened, fractured into splintered factions, vulnerable to external threats. It is during this period of chaos and decline that strange, unfamiliar men with beards and strange beasts, horses, armored soldiers, and advanced weaponry suddenly appear, sowing confusion and fear among the Incas who have never encountered such marvels before. In the midst of this turmoil, Atahualpa, emboldened by his seeming strength and confident in his control over his fractured realm, agrees to meet with the Spanish conquistador Pizarro in the city of Cajamarca. This meeting, however, is a carefully laid trap. The Incas, unprepared for treachery of this kind, are caught unawares. Pizarro swiftly seizes the opportunity, imprisoning the Inca emperor, slaughtering thousands of unarmed warriors, and striking a decisive blow that effectively decapitates the heart of the once unified empire. In a single bold act, Pizarro's forces dismantle the mighty Inca civilization, setting in motion a chain of events that will lead to its rapid and catastrophic collapse. The aftermath is a scene of chaos and despair as the empire disintegrates before their eyes at an unprecedented pace. Desperate to save his life, and perhaps to salvage some semblance of dignity, Atahualpa offers an enormous ransom, filling a room with gold and two with silver. The Incas, eager to ransom their leader, fulfill this demand with incredible dedication, melting down sacred statues, looting temples, and bringing treasures from every corner of the vast empire, an act of devotion and desperation. Pizarro, for his part, initially agrees to accept the ransom, but, in a brutal betrayal, he proceeds to execute Atahualpa, regardless of the payment made. This act of treachery is ruthless and calculated, an outright violation of any notion of honor or agreement. It is a decisive move that shatters the remaining unity of the empire, causing the once centralized authority to crumble into dust. With their emperor gone, and no clear leadership to guide them, the conquered peoples see an opportunity to rise against their Spanish oppressors. The fragile political structure that once held the Inca realm together now lies in ruins. The mighty Tawantinsuyo, the imperial heart, disintegrates. Without a ruler to rally around, and amid the chaos, many groups and factions begin to rebel, fighting fiercely to reclaim their independence. The Spanish conquistadors, meanwhile, manage to seize the city of Cusco, establishing a puppet ruler to maintain a semblance of control. But the conquests quickly shift from organized campaigns to widespread resistance. Some brave and determined Incas, like Manco Inca, retreat into the rugged mountains, where they continue to fight guerrilla warfare against the invaders. Yet, the political unity that once defined the empire is forever lost. The grand political and administrative structure of the Incas, which had held their civilization together for centuries, has vanished, leaving behind only scattered pockets of resistance and chaos. It is in this moment of upheaval that history takes a most ironic turn, an unexpected twist that reveals the cruel unpredictability of conquest and destiny. This rewritten version expands upon the original, weaving in more detailed descriptions, emotional nuances, and contextual explanations to create a richer, more engaging narrative while staying true to the original meaning. The story now flows more smoothly, with clearer transitions, and a deeper exploration of the pivotal events that defined this turbulent chapter in history. Why is it that the Spaniards, intoxicated with their victory after dismantling the mighty Inca Empire, now cast their gaze southward? They look across the vast landscapes that the Incas had never managed to conquer, the land of the Mapuche. These fierce tribes, resilient and fiercely independent, lie just beyond the reach of their previous conquests. The Spanish, having just defeated what was arguably the most formidable empire in South America, with less than 200 men, are filled with a confident, almost presumptive thought. If we could subjugate the Incas, then conquering these tribes without an empire's structure should be a trivial matter. Yet they are completely unaware of the hellish ordeal that awaits them just over the horizon. Pedro de Valdivia emerges as the chosen conquistador, tasked with bringing Chile under Spanish control. A seasoned veteran of European wars and the campaign in Peru, he is a man hardened by battle, known for his brutality and relentless ambition. In the year of our Lord, 1540, he sets out from the city of Cusco, leading an expedition of 150 Spaniards, accompanied by thousands of indigenous auxiliaries, mostly Yanaconas, either loyal or compelled to serve. His mission is clear: establish settlements, create encomiendas, subjugate the native populations, and extract riches from the land, an archetypal blueprint of Spanish conquest. The initial phases of his campaign proceed with relative success. Valdivia and his men cross the scorching, barren expanse of the Atacama Desert, one of the most uninhabitable places on Earth. The journey is perilous. They lose men and horses, yet somehow they persevere. Eventually, they reach the fertile valleys of the Mapuche River, where in the year 1441 they found Santiago del Nuevo Extremo, the new extremity of Santiago. The indigenous Picunche tribes, inhabiting the northern regions of Chile, put up fierce resistance. Still, they are ultimately subdued, their land divided into encomiendas, and their territories parceled out to the conquistadors. Valdivia begins the extraction of gold from local placer deposits, everything proceeding according to the standard Spanish conquest manual. Despite these initial successes, Valdivia's ambition grows insatiable. Conquering Santiago is no longer enough. He dreams of expanding further south, towards the lush, fertile lands of the Biobío River. He eyes the territories that the Incas, with all their might, never managed to subjugate: the vast and fiercely independent lands of the Mapuche people. For the Spaniards, these territories represent the next great challenge, a new frontier that promises riches and glory, but also hides the horrors of a confrontation unlike any they have faced before. In the year 1456, a man named Valdivia set forth into the uncharted southern lands of the New World, accompanied by a modest force of 60 Spanish horsemen and an auxiliary army of indigenous allies. His journey was marked by a series of daring acts of imperial hubris, founding forts and establishing settlements along the way, each one a tangible assertion of Spanish dominance over these distant territories. As he advanced, he named the lands after familiar Spanish cities: Valdivia, Villarrica, and each founding was a bold statement of conquest, woven with the arrogance of imperial ambition. Crosses of Christian faith were driven into the soil, symbolizing divine sanction, while land and people were parceled out as if they were commodities, like herds of livestock to be owned and controlled. Yet beyond the newly erected fortresses and the colonizers' proclamations, the indigenous Mapuche people watched silently. They observed these intruders with a mixture of curiosity and caution, recalling a history that stretched back through generations. They remembered the arrival of other foreign men, those with grand designs of empire, who believed conquest would be straightforward, effortless even. Those earlier conquerors had learned painfully that the land of the Mapuche was not so easily subdued. Bloodshed, suffering, and resilience had marked their encounters, leaving lessons etched into the collective memory. The territory could not be simply taken, subdued, or handed over. It was a land that refused submission. Now these new invaders, strange beasts on two legs, wielding thundersticks, were on the brink of discovering the same harsh truth. Their initial contact with the Mapuche was deceptively peaceful. Some of the indigenous people, perhaps out of curiosity or a sense of necessity, agreed to work in the Spanish gold refineries, seemingly yielding to the newcomers' demands. They appeared compliant, even defeated, as if their spirit had been broken. Valdivia, misreading these signs, grew complacent. Confident in his apparent success, he relaxed his vigilance, convinced that the conquest was already complete. From his vantage point, it seemed the land was securely in Spanish hands. He sent reports to Spain, boasting of his victories, extolling the progress made, and requesting additional settlers to strengthen his growing realm. His ambition knew no bounds. He envisioned creating a personal kingdom within Chile, a sprawling empire forged by his hand. However, beneath this veneer of submission, the true strength of the Mapuche lay in their ability to learn and adapt. The indigenous workers in the gold mines were not defeated or broken. They were watching, studying, and gathering knowledge. They observed how the horses moved, how they were frightened by fire, and how their riders could be thrown from their steeds. They learned the peculiarities of these strange beasts and the strategies of their invaders. They understood that the thunder sticks, the firearms, were powerful but not invincible. Every day, they gained insight into the weaknesses of their enemies, preparing themselves for the inevitable clash that their resilience and strategic cunning would soon bring about. The people quickly learned that while steel armor offers formidable protection, it is not impervious, especially at the joints where vulnerabilities are most exposed. They recognized that muskets, or arquebuses, might be loud and cumbersome, and though they strike fear into the hearts of their enemies, they also require time to reload, presenting an opening for counterattack. Yet, above all, they come to understand a harsh reality. Beneath the protective gear and weaponry, these invaders bleed just as any other man does. This sobering truth fuels a fierce resolve among the indigenous populations. In the year 1553, this realization ignites a powerful uprising among the Mapuche people. Their rebellion is not a chaotic or disorganized outburst, but rather a meticulously coordinated war that erupts simultaneously across their entire territory. The Toquis, the spiritual and political leaders of the Mapuche, have been secretly gathering and planning for this moment, uniting their forces with a shared purpose. Central to this uprising is the appointment of a supreme leader, a figure of extraordinary character and strategic brilliance, Lautaro. Despite being only in his early 20s, Lautaro possesses qualities that set him apart from others. His youth belies a depth of knowledge and experience that makes him a formidable leader. What makes Lautaro truly exceptional is his intimate understanding of the enemy from within. As a teenager, he was captured by the Spanish conquistadors and served as a Yanacona, an auxiliary or helper, under the command of the Spanish governor Valdivia. During his captivity, Lautaro was tasked with caring for horses, observed the Spanish tactics firsthand, and learned their language, Spanish. When the opportunity arose, he seized it, escaping from Spanish captivity and returning to his people. Lautaro returns armed not only with vital knowledge, but also with a strategic vision that could turn the tide of the conflict. He understands that the Spanish are not invincible. They are merely humans, and humans are mortal. With this conviction, Lautaro persuades the Toquis to alter their traditional methods of warfare. Historically, Mapuche warriors relied on large, ferocious attacks in waves, depending heavily on numerical superiority and individual bravery. However, Lautaro advocates for a different approach, one rooted in organization, tactical ingenuity, and the clever use of Spanish weaknesses against themselves. His innovative strategies are put to the test at the small Spanish fort known as Tui Capel. This fort, modest in size, is garrisoned by just 26 Spanish soldiers. The Mapuche warriors surround the fortress, employing their new tactics and disciplined tactics, aiming to demonstrate that even a small force, when well organized and strategically led, can challenge the might of a colonial power. When the Spaniards set out to engage in battle, Lautaro meticulously orchestrates his warriors into coordinated waves, each one attacking with ferocity and then retreating swiftly. Their tactic is not to engage in direct, head-on combat where the weight of Spanish armor would give the conquistadors an undeniable advantage. Instead, Lautaro's forces focus on wearing down their enemies through a series of calculated assaults, gradually sapping their strength and morale. This strategy proves highly effective. The heavily armored Spaniards, burdened by their cumbersome gear, begin to tire after prolonged skirmishes. As their stamina wanes and vulnerability increases, Lautaro's warriors seize the moment to deliver their decisive blow. In one such engagement, 26 Spaniards are slain, all of them, with no survivors left alive to tell the tale. The news of this defeat spreads swiftly to the town of Valdivia, where the authorities react with complacency, misjudging the threat and the resilience of the indigenous fighters. Believing their enemy to be merely a rebellious band of natives who had managed to score a lucky victory against a small garrison, the leaders in Valdivia make a grave error. They underestimate their adversary. They assume that a mere handful of insurgents, despite their recent success, do not pose a serious threat. Their confidence is further emboldened by the idea that if the conquistador leader, Valdivia himself, marches out with his finest cavalry force, comprising 50 of Spain's best horsemen, seasoned veterans from Europe, and hardened by their previous campaigns against the Incas. They could swiftly crush the rebellion in a single day. Thus, Valdivia departs from Concepcion, accompanied by this elite cavalry contingent, fully believing in the ease of victory. These mounted knights, clad in full armor and representing the pinnacle of Spanish military might, are confident in their dominance on the battlefield. However, Lautaro has anticipated this move perfectly. He has chosen his terrain with great care, a densely wooded area where the agility of the horses is severely restricted, neutralizing the Spanish cavalry's primary advantage, mobility. Lautaro has organized his forces into meticulously arranged groups, numbering in the thousands, each with specific orders tailored to maximize their effectiveness. Unlike a chaotic mob, Lautaro's warriors are prepared to fight with discipline and coordination, resembling a well-trained army rather than a disorganized rabble. Their strategic positioning and careful planning set the stage for a decisive confrontation. On the afternoon of December 25th, 1553, as Christmas festivities are underway, Valdivia's expedition reaches the outskirts of Lautaro's chosen battleground. The conquistador, perhaps interpreting the date as a fortunate omen, views this as a sign of divine favor. Yet, this assumption proves to be misguided. Before the Spaniards can even establish their camp, their scouts report disturbing news. Numerous Mapuche warriors are spotted lurking within the nearby forest, their presence a clear indication that Lautaro's forces are well prepared and strategically entrenched. This revelation marks the beginning of what will become a pivotal and challenging encounter for the Spanish forces. The clash erupted with a commanding signal. Valdivia gave the order to advance, and the Spanish cavalry responded swiftly. The riders spurred their horses into motion, their lances lowered and ready, as they charged fiercely toward the visible enemy lines. Meanwhile, the Mapuche warriors, faced with the oncoming assault, instinctively began to retreat, their figures melting into the surrounding forest, seeking cover amid the dense foliage. Valdivia and his men pressed forward in relentless pursuit, unaware that this retreat was precisely what Lautaro had meticulously planned. Lautaro, the strategic genius of the Mapuche, had prepared this terrain to serve as a trap. As the Spanish troops advanced into the forested area, from concealed positions on the flanks, and even from behind the cover of trees, thousands of guerrilla fighters emerged suddenly, launching a fierce and coordinated attack. It was a masterful ambush, designed to catch the invaders off guard and to turn the tide of battle. The Battle of Tucapel was nothing short of a slaughter. The Spanish soldiers attempted to form their traditional battle lines, but they quickly found themselves encircled and overwhelmed. The Mapuche fighters had mastered the art of attacking the horses first, an innovative tactic that proved devastating. Instead of aiming their arrows and spears directly at the soldiers, they targeted the animals that carried them. An arrow or spear piercing a horse's leg or flank would cause the beast to panic, eventually becoming uncontrollable and throwing its rider into disarray. An unhorsed Spanish soldier, weighed down by heavy armor, suddenly found himself vulnerable and exposed. The Mapuche warriors employed long wooden maces, swinging them with lethal precision at the joints of the Spaniards' armor, aiming to incapacitate and disable. They also used ropes and lassos to drag mounted soldiers from their horses, pulling them into the chaos of the fight. The terrain itself became an ally, climbing trees, hiding behind natural cover, and exploiting the numerical advantage. Above all, the Mapuche fighters fought with relentless ferocity, driven by a profound desire to defend their land against invaders intent on enslaving them. Hours of brutal combat stretched on. The Spanish, seasoned veterans, fought valiantly, and their weapons claimed many Mapuche lives. Yet, every time a warrior fell, two more stepped forward to take his place, demonstrating their resilience and unyielding resolve. Lautaro was omnipresent amid the chaos. His voice rang out over the din as he issued orders, reorganized his troops, and directed the relentless assault with the strategic acumen of a seasoned commander. The Spanish soldiers, overwhelmed by the onslaught, saw their horses killed or scattered, their armor battered and dented by the devastating blows of clubs and maces, and their stamina waning. Slowly, their formations broke down, and the massacre continued until the battlefield was saturated with the blood of invaders and defenders alike. Only a small group now remains, fiercely defending themselves around Pedro de Valdivia, the legendary conquistador of Chile, the founder of Santiago, and a man who once believed that subduing the Mapuche people would be a relatively minor campaign. The Mapuche, resilient and unyielding, offer Valdivia a chance to surrender, an option he refuses, choosing instead to fight until the bitter end. Ultimately, he is captured alive, wounded and exhausted, a testament to the ferocity of the confrontation. What happened in the aftermath of that day varies depending on the chronicler's accounts. Some sources claim that Valdivia was executed immediately, ending his life swiftly. Others tell a different story, one of ritual and symbolic death, where he was made to drink molten gold, a grim and poignant act representing the deadly greed that had driven him. Regardless of the specifics, it is undeniable that Pedro de Valdivia met his end at the Battle of Tucapel, and with his death, 50 of the finest Spanish horsemen in Chile perished alongside him. This event marks the most devastating defeat ever experienced by the Spanish in their entire conquest of the Americas. It surpasses even the most crushing defeats faced by the Aztec Empire or the Inca civilization in terms of humiliation and loss. The significance of this loss is amplified by the fact that it was not just a band of ordinary soldiers who fell, but the governor of Chile himself, an emblem of Spanish authority and ambition. The death of Valdivia and his elite cavalry sends a powerful message. The resistance of the Mapuche people is not only unbroken, but increasingly victorious. The news of this defeat quickly spreads across the Spanish territories in Chile, instilling widespread panic among the colonists. The southern cities, unprepared for such a devastating blow, are hurriedly evacuated. Colonists flee en masse toward Santiago, seeking refuge from the relentless advance of the indigenous resistance. Many indigenous allies desert their Spanish counterparts, abandoning the encomiendas, large land grants and systems of forced labor, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. Within a matter of weeks, everything Valdivia had built and established south of the Bio River begins to crumble, dismantled by the fierce and unyielding resistance of the Mapuche. Lautaro, the charismatic and strategic leader of the Mapuche resistance, refuses to pause or retreat. Instead, he gains momentum, riding the wave of recent victories. His triumphs have become legendary, inspiring warriors across the entire Mapuche territory to adopt his tactics and strategies. The victory at Tucapel and subsequent successes have transformed many indigenous fighters into devoted followers of Lautaro's military approach, which emphasizes guerrilla tactics, swift strikes, and psychological warfare. This new wave of momentum signals that the Mapuche resistance is not only alive, but growing stronger, challenging Spanish dominance in the region with renewed vigor and confidence. Reorganizing the Mapuche army into units capable of operating independently marks a significant shift in their military strategy. The process involves creating specialized squads, including cavalry units composed of mounted warriors. These cavalrymen, trained to ride and fight on captured horses, are forming their own crews, developing skills crucial for mobile warfare. Additionally, they are training new riders from among their people, cultivating a more flexible and autonomous fighting force. This transformation aims to elevate the Mapuche from traditional tribal warriors into a modern, organized military entity capable of sustained campaigns. Their ultimate objective is audacious, bordering on the reckless ambition of complete conquest. Lautaro's vision is to seize Santiago, the heart of Spanish power in Chile, and to expel the colonial forces entirely from the territory. With this aim in mind, he marches northward with an army of thousands of warriors, launching relentless attacks on Spanish strongholds along the way. His campaigns are not just about immediate victory, but about systematically dismantling the Spanish presence, rallying more indigenous fighters to his cause with each triumph. Every victory on the battlefield draws additional warriors into the fold, swelling Lautaro's forces and strengthening his resolve. Conversely, each defeat suffered by the Spanish troops chips away at their morale, leaving them increasingly demoralized and vulnerable. The Spanish settlers and soldiers in Santiago are gripped by fear. They send urgent messages to Peru, pleading for reinforcements. The Spanish authorities respond by rapidly fortifying the city's defenses and training local militias, hoping to hold out against the advancing indigenous army. Yet, they remain acutely aware that if Lautaro's amassed forces arrive, Santiago's defenses will be overwhelmed, and the city will fall. The stakes could not be higher. If Santiago falls, it would effectively mark the end of Spanish control over Chile. Lautaro's forces reached the outskirts of Santiago in the year 1554, establishing a strategic camp. From this vantage point, he begins to meticulously plan a siege, intending to starve and weaken the city into surrender. However, his first strategic mistake arises at this critical juncture. Instead of launching an immediate assault, he chooses to wait. His reasoning is to gather additional forces, aiming to secure an overwhelming victory that would make resistance futile. Yet this delay grants the Spanish defenders precious time to prepare, and desperation pushes them to take aggressive action. In a daring move, the Spanish organize a preemptive strike, dispatching a small force of 60 cavalry under the command of Francisco de Villagra. This expedition is essentially a suicidal gamble. The Spanish riders intend to attack a camp filled with thousands of Mapuche warriors, risking everything in a reckless bid to surprise and disorient the indigenous forces. Their advantage lies in their element of surprise and the sheer desperation driving their attack, factors that could turn the tide if luck favors them. Still, the outcome remains uncertain, with the Spanish risking their lives in a high-stakes raid against an overwhelmingly larger and potentially more prepared enemy force. The understanding among the Spanish forces was clear. If they failed to secure victory in this particular confrontation, all would be lost. The battle was set to unfold at dawn, a time chosen for its strategic advantage. As the first light broke through the horizon, the Spanish troops launched a direct and aggressive assault aimed straight for the heart of the Mapuche encampment, with the intent of capturing Lautaro, their young and brilliant leader. The scene that ensued was one of utter chaos. The camp, unprepared for such a daring attack, was thrown into disarray. The Mapuche warriors, caught off guard, scrambled to organize themselves amidst the turmoil. Lautaro, a figure of commanding presence, shouted urgent commands, attempting to rally his troops and coordinate their defenses. Yet, the Spanish assault was so bold, so unexpectedly fierce, that it shattered the cohesion of the Mapuche forces almost instantaneously. In the midst of this chaos, a Spanish spear found its mark, piercing through the air to strike Lautaro himself. The young military prodigy fell to the ground, and with his death, the momentum of the Mapuche resistance against Santiago unraveled. Without their leader, the warriors, losing their sense of direction and purpose, began to retreat. That moment marked the missed opportunity to drive the Spanish from Chile once and for all. Lautaro, who had been only 23 years old at the time of his death, left behind a legacy that was just beginning to take root. Although he was gone, the movement he had ignited did not die with him. Lautaro had demonstrated convincingly that the Spaniards could indeed be defeated. He had pioneered tactics that proved effective against cavalry charges and arquebuses, firearms that had given the Spanish a significant advantage. His leadership and innovative strategies fostered a tradition of resistance that would become a foundational element of Mapuche identity. His death did not bring peace to Chile, quite the opposite in fact. Other leaders from the Mapuche community stepped forward to continue the fight. Capolican, Galbarino, Pelantaro, each of these figures carried the torch, fighting with unwavering ferocity. The Spaniards soon realized that they were not merely facing a charismatic leader who could be eliminated, but rather an entire culture committed to resistance as its core principle. Following Lautaro's demise, Capolican was elected as the supreme Toqui, the highest authority among the Mapuche leaders. Spanish chronicles recount that his election was not merely a political appointment, but was said to have been decided through a grueling test of endurance, a trial that demonstrated the resilience and strength of the Mapuche spirit. This succession marked a new chapter in the ongoing struggle, a testament to the unyielding determination of a people who refused to surrender, whose resistance was woven into the very fabric of their culture and identity. The candidates were tasked with the formidable challenge of carrying a heavy log upon their shoulders. The individual who endured the longest with this burden would earn the title of leader. One man, Capolican, managed to carry the weight for an astonishing span of 2 days and 2 nights without rest. Was this feat real or merely a myth? The story serves to vividly illustrate the kind of leader Capolican was, unyielding, resilient, and unwavering in his strength and resolve. Under Capolican's leadership, the ongoing conflict with the Spanish conquistadors continued, marked by escalating brutality from both sides. Frustrated, after years of fierce resistance, the Spanish began to employ terror tactics to break the spirit of their enemies. They publicly executed prisoners, and to send a terrifying message, They mutilated captives by cutting off their hands and noses. Among the most heinous episodes was the capture of Galvarino, a brave Mapuche warrior, whom the Spaniards mutilated by severing both of his hands before releasing him back to his people. This brutal act, rather than demoralizing the Mapuche, had the opposite effect. Galvarino returned to his community with his mutilated stumps, and instead of succumbing to despair or hiding away, he became a living symbol of resistance. He fought valiantly in subsequent battles, wielding spears tied to his stumps, remnants of his once functional hands, proving that even in the face of mutilation, the spirit of resistance remained unbroken. His image struck terror into the hearts of the Spanish conquerors, surpassing that of any armed warrior. It demonstrated powerfully that, even when physically diminished, the Mapuche refused to surrender or capitulate. In response to the mounting brutality, the Spanish attempted to alter their approach. Unable to subdue the fiercely independent Mapuche through sheer force alone, they turned to divide and conquer strategies. They offered peace treaties to certain groups, promising to leave them unmolested if they accepted Spanish sovereignty, at least nominally. Some groups, exhausted after decades of relentless warfare, accepted these offers, hoping for some respite. Others, however, saw through these overtures as nothing more than calculated attempts to divide allies and weaken the united front of the Mapuche resistance. Eventually, Caupolicán's leadership was betrayed from within. In the year 1558, one of his own betrayed him, leading to his capture by the Spanish forces. This event marked a turning point in the ongoing struggle, illustrating the treacherous complexities of alliances and the high cost of resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. The brutal execution was meticulously designed to serve as a horrifying spectacle, a cruel display of violence intended to break the spirit of the Mapuche people. They sought to impale him alive, subjecting him to a slow, agonizing death that would serve as a grim warning to any who dared resist Spanish domination. Yet, this barbaric act failed to achieve its intended purpose. Instead of crushing their resilience, his martyrdom became a powerful symbol of defiance. It grew into a rallying point, a story whispered by Mapuche mothers to their children, alongside tales of unwavering resistance and the unbreakable will to never surrender. This particular act of cruelty marked a turning point in the ongoing conflict between Spain and the Mapuche, elevating their struggle to a level unique in the entire history of American colonization. While on the rest of the continent, indigenous resistance was systematically crushed over mere decades. In Chile, the fight persisted relentlessly, lasting not just years, but centuries. The Spanish established a formal military boundary at the Biobío River in the year of 1593, a line that would come to symbolize the persistent divide between colonizer and native. 40 years after the death of Pedro de Valdivia, the first Spanish governor and conquistador of Chile, the Spanish crown officially acknowledged what was already painfully obvious. They could not conquer the entire Mapuche territory south of the Biobío River. Instead, they resorted to a strategy reminiscent of the Inca Empire's approach a century and a half earlier. They drew a boundary, a frontier that was to be fiercely guarded, and constructed a series of forts along this line to serve as bulwarks against further rebellion. The Biobío frontier thus became an open wound in the Spanish Empire's vast holdings in the Americas, a persistent reminder that even an empire that seemingly knew no limits, the empire with a sun never set, had its boundaries. This border, with its fortified posts and military presence, was a constant symbol of the limits of Spanish power. Hundreds of Spanish soldiers were permanently stationed within these forts, their presence a testament to the ongoing struggle. Each year, enormous sums of money, measured in thousands of pesos, were allocated to maintain and reinforce this frontier, an expensive and unending endeavor. Yet, despite all these efforts, Mapuche attacks did not cease. Each generation of Spanish rulers believed that they would be the one to finally subdue the resilient Mapuche people, to break their resistance once and for all. In their relentless pursuit, they dispatched new governors, each bringing fresh strategies and military tactics in hopes of finally achieving victory. But each attempt only prolonged the conflict, transforming it into a drawn-out saga that spanned generations. The resilience of the Mapuche persisted, defying the Spanish efforts to quell their resistance and turning the Biobío frontier into a symbol of unyielding defiance, a reminder that some peoples and their spirit cannot be subdued, no matter how formidable the occupying force. Throughout history, Various strategies have been employed in the ongoing struggle between the Spanish colonizers and the indigenous Mapuche people, each attempt aiming either at peaceful evangelization, total warfare, diplomatic treaties, buying loyalty through economic means. Despite these efforts, nothing has managed to establish a lasting dominance. The resilient Mapuche, with their remarkable capacity for adaptation, continuously learn from each new approach, evolving their tactics, strategies, and ways of survival. Over time, something extraordinary begins to unfold. A story of resilience turning into a form of thriving resistance that defies expectations. Not only do the Mapuche withstand the relentless pressure of colonization, but they also flourish amid the chaos. They acquire skills that rival, and in some cases surpass, those of their Spanish adversaries. For instance, they develop a superior horsemanship, learning to raise and train horses with an expertise that allows them to match Spanish cavalrymen on equal footing. Over generations, they establish their own mounted units, caballeria, that are meticulously trained and equipped, capable of confronting the Spanish cavalry directly during combat. They also adopt and perfect the use of long lances, crafted specifically for mounted combat, which enhances their battlefield effectiveness and symbolizes their adaptation to the warfare styles introduced by the colonizers. Their interactions with the Spanish are complex and strategic, trade when it benefits them, and attack when it does not. This dual approach reflects their ability to navigate the dynamics of power with ingenuity and resilience. The pivotal moment in this ongoing conflict comes in the year 1655, marking the Great Uprising of the Mapuche, a fiercely coordinated rebellion that decimates all Spanish settlements south of the Biobío River. Towns like Valdivia, the imperial capital, Villarrica, and Osorno are completely destroyed, burned to the ground, leaving a trail of death and capture that devastates Spanish presence in the region. Thousands of Spaniards are killed or taken prisoner, and in a matter of months, decades worth of Spanish colonization efforts are effectively erased. The Spanish colonial forces are forced to retreat once again to the northern bank of the Biobío River, relinquishing control over the southern territories. This event results in the solidification of an almost invisible but unbreakable frontier. The border between Spanish-controlled lands and Mapuche territory becomes a formidable, almost impassable barrier, an unspoken line that defines the limits of Spanish influence. As the centuries progress into the 17th, formal negotiations, known as parlamentos, begin. These are structured, official meetings held between Spanish representatives and the Mapuche Toquis, leaders, who engage in diplomatic negotiations that recognize each other as equals. In these assemblies, the relationship is framed not as one of conquest and submission, but as between sovereign powers, an empire and an independent nation. The Spanish, in their terminology, refer to the territory north of the Biobío as the Kingdom of Chile, while tacitly acknowledging the Mapuche's autonomy south of the river. This recognition, though unofficial, is profound. It embodies a recognition of the impossible, a people without a formal state having fought against a global empire to a standstill, maintaining their independence through resilience and strategic diplomacy. In this ongoing saga of resistance, the Mapuche have demonstrated that even without formal statehood, they can challenge and hold their ground against an overwhelming imperial force, forging a narrative of endurance that continues to inspire. The agreements and boundaries established by the various parliaments are frequently violated by both sides, creating a persistent pattern of tension that endures through generations. While periods of relative peace occasionally break the cycle of conflict, they are often interrupted by sudden outbreaks of violence, and the frontier, marked by the river Biobío, remains a defining divide that has shaped the history of the covered region. This river functions as a natural boundary, a point where the reach of imperial Spanish authority historically came to an end. In the same way, the Maule River once marked the boundary of the Inca Empire's influence, serving as a geographic and symbolic line that delineated the limits of imperial control. As the 19th century dawned, the continent was engulfed in revolutionary fervor. Wars of independence erupted across Latin America, ignited by the desire of Creole elites to break free from colonial rule. In Chile, this movement culminated in the Declaration of Independence in the year of 1910. Prominent leaders like Bernardo O'Higgins of Chile and José de San Martín of Argentina dedicated themselves to liberating their respective nations from Spanish dominance. Their efforts were successful, and Chile emerged as a free and sovereign nation. However, the independence brought with it complex challenges that could not be ignored. The newly formed Chilean government inherited the existing border at the Biobío River, along with a long-standing and intricate conflict involving the Mapuche people. These indigenous inhabitants, who had resisted colonization for centuries, now faced a new reality. Their land was part of an independent Chile, yet their own aspirations for autonomy and self-determination remained unfulfilled. The leaders of the liberation movements, men who had fought fiercely for their own people's freedom, suddenly found themselves confronting an uncomfortable question: what to do with the people who also sought their independence. Within the Mapuche community, opinions were divided. Some indigenous leaders saw the emerging Chilean Republic as a potential ally, believing that independence from Spain might provide a better opportunity for their own aspirations than continued colonial rule. Others, however, viewed the new government with deep skepticism, sensing that the true intentions of the Chilean authorities might not differ significantly from those of their previous imperial predecessors. And they were right to be cautious. The new Chilean Republic, eager to expand and modernize, cast its gaze southward with the same voracious eyes that had once looked upon the Incas and the Spanish conquistadors. To the south, the fertile lands, lush forests, and abundant natural resources appeared as irresistible opportunities for growth and development. Yet, these ambitions were not purely economic or strategic. They carried a darker undertone. The vision of progress often translated into the desire to subjugate and assimilate the Mapuche people, who had managed to resist domination for generations. Over time, the rhetoric of national unity and progress shifted, but the underlying intentions remained largely unchanged. The goal was clear: to bring the Mapuche and their territories under the control of the Chilean state, often at the expense of their autonomy and cultural identity. During the initial decades after independence, Chile was still preoccupied with establishing itself as a cohesive nation, consolidating its political structures, and asserting sovereignty over its territory. As a result, attention to the southern frontier and the unresolved issues with the Mapuche was temporarily set aside. Yet the underlying tensions continued to simmer beneath the surface, foreshadowing future conflicts that would test the nation's resolve and its commitment to justice and reconciliation. In the early 19th century, the region was already marred by internal strife and conflicts with neighboring nations, notably Peru and Bolivia. But by the year 1860, Chile's political landscape had stabilized, and the nation's ambitions of territorial expansion grew ever more pronounced. It was at this juncture that the Chilean government resolved that the long-standing issue of the Mapuche people must be settled once and for all. They termed this effort the pacification of Araucania, a phrase that, in reality, concealed a far more sinister truth. The term pacification was nothing more than a euphemism, a thinly veiled disguise for invasion and conquest. It signified the final attempt to break the resilient resistance that the Mapuche had maintained for over 3 centuries. The Chilean military, now equipped with the latest technological advancements of the 19th century, modern rifles, artillery, and the telegraph, marched into Mapuche territory with an overwhelming advantage. The campaign, which commenced in 1862, would stretch over more than 2 decades, marking a prolonged and brutal effort to subjugate the indigenous peoples of the region. This was no easy task. The resistance of the Mapuche had historically been formidable, and this time was no different. However, what set this campaign apart was the decisive role played by technology. Repeating rifles, capable of firing multiple shots in rapid succession, vastly outstripped the firing rate of any individual warrior. Artillery pieces bombarded fortifications from distances that made counterattacks perilous. The advent of the telegraph allowed for near instantaneous communication between units, enabling the Chilean army to coordinate its movements with unprecedented speed and precision. Despite these technological advantages, the Mapuche fighters did not yield easily. Their resilience was marked by fierce, strategic resistance. Quilipan, a prominent leader, a Toqui, emerged as a symbol of this enduring defiance. Drawing upon the tactical ingenuity reminiscent of Lautaro, who had fought against the Spanish conquistadors 3 centuries earlier, Quilipan orchestrated guerrilla warfare that frustrated the better-equipped Chilean forces. His tactics included attacking supply lines, launching surprise raids, and avoiding direct confrontations where the Chilean army's technological edge could be exploited. Each stretch of territory transformed into a costly battleground, as the Mapuche employed hit-and-run tactics that stretched the Chilean military's resources and patience. the response from the Chilean side was often brutal and systematic. In a show of force and suppression, traditional Mapuche dwellings, rucas, were burned, and the indigenous communities faced severe repression. These actions were part of a broader strategy to break the spirit of the Mapuche and to establish control over their ancestral lands. In essence, what was officially called pacification was, in fact, a war of conquest, an aggressive campaign driven by expansionist ambitions, technological superiority, and a relentless determination to erase centuries of indigenous resistance. The conflict would leave a lasting scar on the history of the region, marking a dark chapter of colonial violence disguised behind the veneer of progress and modernization. They devastate the crops, seize livestock, and forcibly displace entire communities. What appears to be a military campaign is, in reality, a brutal war of extermination disguised beneath the guise of national security efforts. Thousands of Mapuche lives are lost in this relentless onslaught, while countless others are driven from their ancestral lands, their centuries-old connection to the earth severed by force. By the year 1881, the Chilean army proclaims victory. Their military presence has been cemented with the establishment of forts scattered across the vast territories traditionally inhabited by the Mapuche people. These strategic strongholds serve as symbols of conquest, marking the beginning of a new era of domination. The lands are now parceled out into plots, meticulously divided among Chilean and European colonists, effectively stripping the indigenous inhabitants of their territorial sovereignty. The Mapuche are confined to small reserves, reduced patches of land that represent only a tiny fraction of what they once controlled and nurtured for generations. After centuries of resilient resistance, resisting the encroachment of not one but two imperial powers, the Mapuche people have finally been subdued. Their fierce struggle, which spanned over 400 years, has culminated in a tragic loss of independence and autonomy. The once vast and vibrant territories, rich with history and culture, have been diminished to mere fragments, a testament to the relentless march of colonial expansion and military might. Despite their resilience, the indigenous communities now face the harsh reality of subjugation, their history overshadowed by the machinery of conquest and colonization.